Facts about Catherine Parr, the forgotten final wife of Henry VIII who outlived him. When it comes to the 6 chaotic marriages of King Henry VIII, most people tend to think of Anne Boleyn and her infamous demise by beheading. Others still might think of the long-suffering Catherine of Aragon and how Henry's desire to divorce her further stirred up religious tensions. But it is Henry's final wife, Catherine Parr, whose story is most often forgotten. In many dramatic portrayals, the Queen is made out to be an older, sedate woman who played nursemaid to her husband. In fact, Catherine lived a fascinating life marked by a passionate faith, 4 marriages, an influential writing career, secret love, heartbreak, and plots against her safety. With an ardent personality that contrasts heavily against the persona modern adaptations suggest, Catherine Parr's story overflows with intrigue and courage. In life, she not only played a vital role in the reformation of the Church, but also acted as a caring stepmother to Henry's children, treating the one-day Queen Elizabeth I as she would her own daughter. Mystery surrounds the cause of Catherine's death, and even after being buried, her story didn't end. Read on to learn the most interesting facts about this forgotten Queen of England, including what happened to her body after she'd been laid to rest in a tomb for more than 200 years. She was personally chosen by Henry VIII. All of Henry VIII's first 5 wives were pushed into his attention, at least partially, by factions of power-hungry families and clans in court. His first wife, Catherine of Aragon, was the daughter of the famous royal couple of Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella. Their marriage occurred after the demise of Henry's elder brother, who was then King of England and married to the Spanish royal, who was also Catherine Parr's namesake. It is even possible, though unlikely, that the whirlwind marriage to Anne Boleyn could have been somewhat engineered by her ambitious family. After the passing of his third wife, a disappointing political arrangement that gave him his 4th wife, and the fiasco that ended with him ordering the beheading of his 5th wife, Henry was left befuddled, ailing, and at the end of his rope. He was drawn, it appears, to Catherine Parr's mature sensibilities. He handpicked her to be the next Queen of England, and there is no evidence to suggest any court powers influenced this decision. She became a widow 3 times over. Before marrying Henry VIII, Catherine had already lost 2 other husbands. At the age of 17, she married the well-to-do Sir Edward Berg of Gainsborough. The short-lived marriage was fraught with misery, as Edward was a tyrannical and volatile individual who often exploded in violent, angry outbursts. Catherine's mother managed to extricate her from the household for a short time, but her respite did not last. Her mother soon perished, and her husband Edward later succumbed to a possible illness. These events left Catherine virtually alone in the world. It was perhaps her lonely and powerless situation that drove Catherine to seek a second marriage, this time to a man named John Neville, who was twice her age. The marriage granted her a title and a measure of influence, but it was also short-lived. Catholic outrage had been sparked by the defiant King Henry VIII's decision to annul the marriage to his first wife. Rebels in the neighboring territories dragged away Catherine's husband, leaving her and his children as hostages. Though eventually Neville was able to return and save them, this and the resulting scandal left the family's reputation tarnished. Around 5 years later, Catherine's second husband grew ill and perished. While she went on to marry King Henry VIII, she also outlived him and became a widow once again in 1547. Catherine's last husband was obsessed with her stepdaughter, Elizabeth I. Thomas Seymour was the brother of Henry VIII's third wife, Lady Jane Seymour. Within a month of Henry's passing, he asked the then 13-year-old Princess Elizabeth I to marry him. When she refused, Seymour sought out the king's widow, Catherine Parr, almost immediately. However, his goal in marrying Catherine may have simply been to get closer to her stepdaughter, Elizabeth. Reports from the servants of Elizabeth and Catherine say that Seymour hounded the teenage princess, constantly visiting her bedchambers in the mornings when she was in a state of undress without invitation. The man would not cease badgering Elizabeth, even against the urging of her servants. At one point, Catherine discovered Seymour embracing Elizabeth in what they called horseplay, and the next day, Elizabeth was sent away to live elsewhere. Even after she had gone, Thomas urged others to make lewd observations of the teenager on his behalf. Upon Catherine's passing soon afterward, Seymour made a fatal final attempt to get the princess in his clutches. He was arrested after trying to kidnap Elizabeth, marry her in secret, and thus claim her and the throne for himself. Thomas Seymour was executed after being caught. She accused her husband of poisoning on her deathbed. It is said that Catherine Parr perished of childbed fever shortly after giving birth. The illness also claimed the life of Lady Jane Seymour, another of Henry VIII's wives. But historians note a strange detail in Catherine's demise. As she lay suffering from the delirium caused by the fever, Catherine's final moments of consciousness were spent accusing her husband Thomas Seymour of poisoning her. Though this spontaneous claim may have been caused by the shaky mental state brought on by the fever, the fact that Thomas had long been smitten with Catherine's stepdaughter Elizabeth I, as well as his intense ambition to become king, must be taken into consideration. With his long-time designs on the young princess, it is possible he only married Catherine in the first place to get closer to Elizabeth. She strongly influenced the Reformation of the Church. Catherine was a woman of deep faith and strongly held Protestant beliefs. She ventured into her marriage with a mission of spreading her faith and giving strength to the Reformation movement. She went so far as to publish several religious works of writing under her own name, all of which were largely read and celebrated. One of these texts, The Lamentation of the Sinner, detailed her personal transition from Catholic to Protestant. A brief plot by Catholic supporters at court to have her executed was launched. The group captured a notoriously audacious rebel and submitted her to torture, hoping the rebel would reveal damning evidence about the Queen. Catherine owned many banned books that, if discovered, may have led to dire consequences for her. However, the rebel did not talk and a document was discovered by Catherine's physician, thus uncovering the sordid plot. This scandal proved enough to further dishevel the power balance between Protestant and Catholic influences in the seat of power, giving an edge to the Reformation. She was in love with someone else when she married the king. Catherine Parr's affections lay with Thomas Seymour, the man who eventually became her final husband. Before Henry's proposal, she had written letters to Seymour that revealed her true desires. She had become acquainted with him at court, and she wrote to him of her wish to marry him very soon after her second husband's demise. At the time, he was a brother-in-law to the king and uncle to Henry's sole heir. It seems, however, that Catherine felt the calling of her faith more strongly than her heart. She went through with the marriage to Henry with the intention of bringing him, and thus a large part of England, closer to the Protestant belief system. Some religious radicals of the time likened her to the biblical figure Esther, who married a Persian king and influenced him to protect others of her faith. She acted as Henry's caretaker and nurse, before a terrible jousting mishap. Henry VIII had been a vital and athletic man known for his good looks and impeccable fashion. However, the incident left the king's leg with a festering wound that was covered in agonizing, ulcerated sores. It is this injury that changed him from a vivacious force of nature to a bad-tempered, cruel, and overly indulgent tyrant. While Henry had a team of physicians that attended to him night and day, his previous wives had never taken an active role in the management of his tormenting physical condition. Catherine married Henry late in his life, but it is said that she had a transformative effect on him. She is known for the great pains and efforts she took in maintaining the king's well-being and health. Throughout his final years, she nursed the ailing king and cared for him, tending to his capricious needs and dressing his wounds. She reconnected the king with his estranged children. When Catherine assumed the role of Queen of England, she took her new position very seriously. She also adopted and fostered a loving relationship with Henry's 3 children. The young Prince Edward, who was just 6 years old when she became his stepmother, often wrote to her with affection. There is also proof, in letters, of a warm and loving relationship between her and the Princess Elizabeth in the later years of his reign. Henry had grown distant from his children. They were often sent to live at various places away from Henry, and he rarely saw them in person. The girls were kept out of sight for political reasons, and Edward was sent away to avoid catching the plague. Catherine changed this strained situation, ordering the children's return, bringing the family back together, and reconnecting their bonds. She was the first Queen of England to publish a book in her own name. Catherine proved to be a prolific writer and deep religious thinker in her lifetime, going so far as to publish books in her name. Her first work, a translation of Latin psalms called Psalms or Prayers, was published anonymously, but from there she became the first English woman to openly publish her writing in her native tongue. Her book Prayers or Meditation was a collection of devotional texts specifically curated to accompany a Protestant standpoint of worship. Her final work, The Lamentations of a Sinner, was published after the king's passing and proved to be a wildly influential book. It detailed her personal religious transformation from Catholic to Protestant. The book was written in a pointedly humble tone that would have been shocking coming from a woman who had been queen. The content of the book took a strong position of encouraging people to read and interpret scripture on their own. She remarried in secret just 4 months after Henry's passing. Soon after King Henry VIII's demise, Catherine Parr took steps to marry the man she loved, Thomas Seymour, who first proposed to Princess Elizabeth and was rejected, took his marriage offer to Catherine. Since it had only been 4 months since the passing of the king, the engaged couple knew they would not get the permission of the Regency Council. Instead, they chose to marry in secret. When news of their wedding reached the court, it sparked a wild controversy. The Seymour family was torn apart over the match. Though Catherine was finally married to the man she loved, it would not bring her any contentment. Her husband appears to have continuously lusted after her young teenage stepdaughter, Elizabeth. His actions escalated even after many expressed their discomfort with Seymour's advances. Eventually, Catherine made the heartbreaking move to send her beloved stepdaughter away. It is unclear whether this was done to protect her from Seymour, or because she was jealous due to his behavior. She was given the first Protestant funeral in England. At age 35, Catherine became unexpectedly pregnant with Thomas Seymour's child. Though she gave birth to a daughter, she only survived for a few days after her delivery. Her passing appears to have been caused by an infection following childbirth, but it also could have been poisoning by her scheming husband. Following her demise, Catherine was given the first Protestant funeral in England at her home, Sedate Castle. She was also the only English queen to be buried in a private residence. Her funeral marked a major turning point in the history of Christian worship in England. It appears that her burial at the castle was not well known, as her resting place was only rediscovered more than 200 years after her burial. Her remains were disturbed more than once. Catherine's remains now lay in a beautifully carved, white marble tomb, but many disturbing events occurred before this splendid fixture was constructed in 1863. When John Locust discovered her grave at the moldering ruins of Sedate Castle in 1782, it was quite by accident. According to his testimony, after he removed her body from its resting place, he made some striking observations. She was wrapped in a shroud, but her hair, teeth, and nails all appeared to be in good condition. Even when cutting away some of the shroud, he was surprised to see that the skin of her arm was still white and moist. He pilfered a few locks of her hair and reburied the queen. This was not to be the final misadventure with her remains. In a much more upsetting report made 10 years after Locust's discovery, Catherine's body was removed from its resting place again and tossed onto a rubbish heap in the open air. A chilling article published in 1792 says that a group of ruffians abused the corpse and left it in a state of mutilation before it was reburied. In 1817, Catherine's remains were disinterred again to be given a proper burial in the tomb of Lord Chandos. Later, her grave was adorned with the gorgeous marble fixtures befitting of her royal, dignified life.